My coworker spent 3 years convincing everyone I was falling apart. I spent 11 months making sure everyone watched her do it to herself. My coworker Britt told my manager I cried in the bathroom after every meeting. That part was true. What she left out was why. I joined the marketing department at Teswell Systems 3 years ago. I was 31, fresh off a second master's degree, a portfolio that had taken 6 years to build. I'd spent my entire 20s getting good at one thing, making brands communicate to humans in language that landed. I wasn't flashy about it. I wasn't the kind of person who walked into a room and changed its temperature. I built decks quietly, pitched carefully, revised constantly, and finished what I started. My first week at Teswell, I stayed until 9 p.m. every single night, not to impress anyone, not to signal ambition, because the work was there, and I wanted to do it right. Britt Holloway had been there for 4 years when I arrived. She had the corner desk with the collection of approximately 11 fidget spinners she'd accumulated from various conference swag bags, and a dry erase board covered in brightly colored sticky notes that said things like "Dream Big" and "Progress Over Perfection" and "Good Vibes Only." She gave me a full tour on my first day. She showed me which Keurig pods were worth using and which ones tasted like a parking garage. She told me which conference rooms had bad acoustics, which client contact went by a nickname he'd never explicitly given anyone but appreciated when you used it, and which vendor sent the best holiday gift baskets. She remembered every name she'd ever heard. She laughed at things that were only moderately funny and made them feel actually funny. She brought homemade granola bars to the office every Friday in a wax paper bag with a little printed label that said Britt's Kitchen in a handwritten font she'd clearly downloaded from somewhere. They were legitimately good. Honey, oat, a faint taste of cardamom. I thought she was wonderful. I told Derek about her on the phone during my commute home that first week. "There's this woman on my team," I said. "I think we're going to be friends." Derek said that was great. He was making dinner. I could hear it in the background, the particular clatter of our specific pan. He said he was glad I'd found a good one. I should have known something was wrong when, 3 weeks in, my first campaign concept disappeared. It was a rebrand pitch for one of the firm's mid-tier clients, a specialty running shoe company called Alcove. They made trail runners for serious hikers, people who actually spent weekends in mud, not people who bought the shoes to wear to brunch. The brand had an identity problem. Their existing visuals skewed too aspirational, too polished, not true to the customers who were actually buying the shoes. I'd spent 2 full weekends developing the concept, competitive analysis across 7 comparable brands, audience segmentation work that identified 3 distinct buyer personas with different entry points to the product, a full visual identity concept based around what I was calling earned grit, the idea that the wear and dirt on a shoe was evidence of the life you were actually living. The deck was 46 slides. I saved it to the shared drive at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday night, and I know the exact time because I texted Derek to say I was finally coming to bed, and he texted back a single heart emoji, and the timestamp on that message was 11:48 p.m. Monday morning, I came in to find that the client presentation had been moved up, and my manager, a man named Patrick, had sent an 8 a.m. email to the full team saying that Britt had developed a strong concept over the weekend, and they'd be going with hers for the pitch. 23 people were CC'd on that email, including the VP of Client Services and 2 people whose job it was to track this sort of thing. I opened Britt's deck. It was 39 slides, different order, different font. The color palette shifted from the muted earth tones I'd chosen to something slightly warmer, more amber-leaning. 2 of the 7 competitor examples I'd used were different. The specific wording of the 3 brand archetypes had been changed, but the underlying architecture, the way they'd been identified, the logic of why those 3 and not others, was identical to mine. The audience persona framework was slightly reorganized, but built from the same bones. The central concept, the language around authenticity of use and the visual storytelling of wear over time, was the same idea expressed 3 degrees to the left. I sat at my desk for 45 minutes trying to figure out what had happened. I went back to the shared drive. My file was still there. I opened it. All 46 slides, timestamp showing Sunday 11:47 p.m. I compared slides. I told myself 2 smart people working the same problem sometimes arrive at similar places. I'd heard that before. I believed it, or tried to. I went over and over the differences, looking for evidence that this was just convergent thinking. 2 talented people landing in adjacent space. I found enough differences to build reasonable doubt, just barely enough. I went to the bathroom and cried for 7 minutes, not because I believed she'd stolen it, because I was embarrassed that the thought had crossed my mind, because I was new, and I was already aware that being a new woman in a room full of people who'd known each other for years meant I was carrying a deficit of goodwill I hadn't earned yet. I didn't want to be the person who files a complaint in month 1. I didn't want to be the paranoid one. I didn't want to be difficult. That was my first mistake. I didn't say anything. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. It happened again. Over the following 8 months, it happened 4 more times. Never identical, never blatant, always precise enough in its adjustments that if I brought it up, I would be the one who sounded unhinged. She'd slightly changed the strategic framework. She'd swap 3 of the 5 visual references I'd pulled for different ones. She'd replace one market example with a comparable alternative. She worked in the margins of what I'd built, filing down the most distinctive edges, sanding the surfaces to something that looked like her own natural output. Each time I went to the bathroom, each time I cried for somewhere between 5 and 12 minutes, each time I came back to my desk and said nothing. nothing. Apparently, Britt told Patrick about the crying, not that she was the reason for it, just that I cried in the bathroom, expressed with the careful concern of someone who genuinely worried about a struggling colleague. She must have said it in exactly the right tone, because Patrick came to me directly. He sat on the edge of my desk and lowered his voice and said he just wanted me to know his door was always open if I was going through something. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. He meant well. He was a decent man who had no idea what was happening inside his own team. I thanked him and said I was fine. He nodded, but kept a slightly watchful look on me after that, the kind you give someone you've mentally categorized as fragile. I figured it out on a Tuesday in October, month 7, when I came in late after a dentist appointment and found the team already in the large glass-walled conference room for a strategy session I hadn't been told about. I caught a single slide on the projector screen before Britt clicked past it, a hexagonal graphic with 3 overlapping circles in specific proportions. I had drawn that exact graphic in my personal notebook at approximately 2 a.m. 3 weeks earlier. I had photographed the notebook page before digitizing it, the way I always did, because I'm the kind of person who documents things. My handwriting was visible in the margins of that photograph. I walked into the conference room. Britt looked up immediately. Her smile was perfect, warm and quick and exactly calibrated. "Dara, you're here. We started without you. Patrick tried to reach you." I looked at Patrick. He looked slightly uncomfortable. "I tried the main line," he said. "I had received no calls, no emails, no calendar update." I know because I checked my phone 3 seconds after walking into the room, and the call log showed nothing from any Tesswell number between 8 p.m. the previous night and that moment. I sat down. I looked at the slides cycling through on the projector. I looked at my hands flat on the conference table. I concentrated on keeping my face neutral and pleasant. I said almost nothing for the rest of the meeting. That was the day I stopped crying in bathrooms. That night, I sat on the couch next to Derek and told him everything from the beginning. Not the sanitized version I'd been telling myself, the real version, with all the parts I'd been explaining away. He sat very still and listened to all of it without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. "Do you have any proof?" he asked. "No." "Then we're going to get you proof." Derek is a CPA. He thinks in documentation. He thinks in trails and timestamps and the specific kind of evidence that doesn't have room for interpretation. He's also the most patient person I've ever known, which has occasionally frustrated me, and in this specific moment was exactly what I needed. We built a system together that night at our kitchen table with Derek's notepad and 2 cups of tea that went cold while we worked. Starting the following Monday, I began documenting everything in a way that was legally bulletproof. Every single concept I developed for work began with a handwritten page in a spiral-bound notebook. I dated each page in the top right corner, wrote the client name and project, and sketched the initial concept in enough detail to be recognizable as the seed of whatever came next. Then I photographed each page with my phone before moving to digital development. Phone photographs automatically embed metadata, including exact timestamp, GPS location, and device serial number. If someone ever challenged the date, the metadata would confirm it. I then drafted every digital document on my personal laptop first, always in Google Docs, which retains a complete revision history showing every edit with timestamps accurate to the second and tied to the logged-in account. No one at Tesswell had access to my personal Google account. The trail was entirely mine. I saved nothing to the shared company drive until the moment I was ready to present it in a meeting or send it to a client. Not a day early, not overnight. I'd upload it from my personal machine minutes before the presentation, so it appeared in the system exactly when it needed to. The second piece was harder because it required a kind of discipline that doesn't come naturally to me. I told no one my ideas, not a preliminary sketch, not a directional thought shared casually over coffee, not the kind of vague, "I'm thinking about going in this direction, what do you think?" That had been a natural part of how I'd worked in every previous job. I became very quiet about my process. I smiled and nodded in team brainstorms and contributed general feedback on other people's work, but kept my actual thinking inside my own documents. My coworkers probably thought I was pulling back, withdrawing. A few of them might have thought I was struggling, which is what Britt had been suggesting to anyone who'd listen. I let them think that. The third piece was the log. I opened a plain document on my personal laptop and called it Work Notes. Deeply boring title. At the end of every single workday for 11 months, I added an entry. What I had worked on that day. What, if anything, I had mentioned to anyone even in passing, even as a vague directional comment. What showed up in Britt's work in the following days and weeks, and how closely it mapped to what I'd documented. By month 4, I had 9 documented instances. By month 7, 17. By month 9, 22, including 4, where the timeline was airtight to the point of being inarguable. My Google Doc revision history showed the idea developing in my file 3 days, 6 days, 10 days, and 14 days respectively, before the same idea appeared in Britt's deliverable. My notebook photographs predated even the earliest version of her documents in the company system, and then I found the mechanism. Month 8. I'd left my workstation unlocked for approximately 12 minutes to get water from the kitchen. When I came back, I noticed that Britt's monitor was at a slightly different angle than it usually was, angled toward my desk rather than facing her own. I registered it without consciously registering it, the way you register a detail in your peripheral vision and file it somewhere you can't immediately access. 2 weeks later, lying awake at 3 a.m., I remembered it. I requested that IT pull the access logs on my workstation. You can do that. Most people don't know you can. Most people don't think to ask. The IT manager looked slightly surprised when I made the request and asked if I suspected a specific issue. I said I just wanted to review what access had been logged. He said he'd have it for me by end of day. The logs showed that my workstation had been accessed remotely 19 times over a 14-month period. Every instance was on an evening or a weekend. Every instance came from the same internal IP address. I didn't know immediately whose machine that address belonged to. I had an idea, but I wanted confirmation before I did anything with it. I went back to IT and asked, as quietly as I could manage, whether it was possible to identify which device on the network corresponded to that address. The IT manager looked at the address. He looked at me. He opened a different window on his computer and looked at it for a moment. He said he'd need to check a few things and would get back to me. He got back to me the next morning with a written note. The IP address belonged to a specific workstation assigned to Britt Holloway. I sat with that note in my lap for a long time. Then I scanned it, saved the scan to my personal cloud storage, and put the original in a folder at home. I didn't go to Patrick. Patrick had been CC'd on every email that credited Britt with work that had originated in my files, and he had never once questioned the pattern. He'd watched the situation develop over months and either missed it or let it happen. I wasn't sure which, and I wasn't willing to take the risk of going to him first. If he was blind, he might go to Britt immediately with my concerns and give her time to construct a response. If he was complicit, the outcome would be worse. I called the legal department instead. Specifically, I reached out to a woman named Margot, who handled employee relations. I'd met her once at a company all hands. She had a calm, measured quality I'd noticed. I called her direct line and asked very precisely how I would go about documenting a concern related to intellectual property within a team context. I did not use the word theft. I did not name Britt. I used the phrase potential irregularities and documentation-based concern, and I said, I want to make sure I understand the appropriate process before I take any further steps. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Margot said, can you come to my office this afternoon at 4:30? I brought everything. The notebook, with the photographs and the metadata printouts Derek had helped me generate showing the embedded timestamp and GPS data for each image. The Google Doc revision histories, printed out on 43 pages with specific timestamps highlighted in yellow. The IT access logs and the written note from the IT manager confirming the IP address assignment. The 11 months of daily log, organized by date and cross-referenced with documented instances of overlap. All 22 instances flagged and described. Margot read through everything without speaking. I counted the minutes on the clock on her wall. 11 minutes and approximately 40 seconds. She looked up at me over her reading glasses. How long have you been building this? 11 months. She looked back down at the documents. She turned several pages slowly, looking at specific entries. Then she set the stack down and folded her hands on top of it. I'm going to need to bring in a few people, she said. Can I keep copies of these? I have duplicates. Of course you do. Something in her voice that wasn't quite a smile. Give me 2 weeks. I walked back to my desk. I sat down. I opened my email and responded to 2 client notes and attended a 3 p.m. call about a campaign timeline and said goodbye to my team at 5:30 like nothing had happened. I was very good at that by then. The thing about Britt that I hadn't fully understood until I started watching her with the distance that documentation forces on you is that her warmth was a precision instrument. She deployed it with extraordinary accuracy. She remembered the specific name of your dog and your coffee order and the city your parents had retired to, and the name of your sister's fiancé, even if you'd mentioned him only once 6 months ago. She sent thinking of you texts when you casually mentioned a sick relative. She laughed at jokes that were only about 60% funny and elevated them to 90% through the specific quality of her attention. She cried at the retirement party of a manager she'd known for 8 months, and the timing of the tears was exactly right, just as the speeches were ending, when the emotion in the room was at its peak. 3 people moved toward her to offer comfort. She had Patrick. She had Carla, a VP 2 levels above Patrick, who referred to Britt as sunshine in internal emails, and said openly in meetings that she didn't know what the team would do without her. She had most of the other people on the floor because she was genuinely pleasant to be around and people don't look for the mechanism behind a smile when the smile feels good. She had the office in a way I never had it and probably never would because I am not warm in that way. I'm thorough. I'm precise. I follow through. I say what I mean and I mean what I say. But I don't remember coffee orders unless I write them down. And I sometimes forget that not everyone wants the honest answer to a question they've asked. What took me a long time to see through the warmth was the pattern underneath. Britt's warmth had limits, and the limits revealed themselves when she was threatened. I watched it happen to a junior designer named Owen, who had been on the team for about a year when I joined. Owen was 24, very quick, slightly disorganized, but brilliant when he was engaged with a problem. He made a significant error on a client file, a typo in a press release that went to 14 journalists before anyone caught it. The client was furious. The error was real, and the consequences were real, and I'm not saying Owen wasn't responsible. But in the team meeting Patrick called to address it, Britt said Owen's name exactly 4 times in 12 minutes, each time with a gentle, pained concern in her voice, the specific tone of someone who hates to bring up a hard truth but feels obligated to honesty. Each sentence was technically factual. Not one of them contained anything she could later be accused of saying. And collectively, across 12 minutes, they constructed a complete case against Owen as the sole responsible party for a failure that had actually involved several handoff failures in the approval chain. Owen was put on a performance improvement plan 3 days later. He lasted 3 more months and then resigned. He was crying when he turned in his key card. 2 people said they'd miss him. One of them was Britt. I thought about Owen a lot during the 11 months I spent building my case. I thought about what it had cost him to be on the wrong end of that particular skill. I thought about the woman who'd left 8 months before I'd even arrived, whose exit interview concerns had apparently been filed and not escalated. I thought about whatever the shape of her life had looked like after she left, whether she'd found somewhere better or whether she'd carried the confusion of not quite understanding what had happened to her. I thought about how long Britt had been doing this. I thought about how good she had gotten at it. Margot came back to me in 11 days instead of 14. She brought 2 people, a woman from HR named Patricia, whose last name I didn't catch, and a man I'd never met who introduced himself as the company's in-house legal counsel. They used a conference room in the legal wing. No glass walls, the kind of room the company kept for conversations it didn't want visible. They asked me to walk through everything again from the beginning. I did. When I finished, the attorney said he needed to share something and asked whether I was prepared for the possibility that the situation was more complex than I'd described. I said yes. He said that IT had completed their investigation. The remote access to my workstation had originated from Britt's machine, which was confirmed. But in the process of investigating, they'd also found that Britt had been accessing other workstations, not just mine. 3 others, all belonging to junior employees or people who'd joined within the previous 2 years. The access logs showed a pattern that extended back 27 months. He also said that one former employee, a woman who had left the company 8 months ago, had flagged similar concerns in her exit interview. The note had been filed and never escalated. I kept my hands flat on the table. I kept my face still. Did she know why she was leaving? I asked. Patricia looked at her notes. She reported that she felt she wasn't growing professionally and her ideas weren't being recognized. I thought about that framing. The careful, almost clinical distance of it. The way a real experience of sustained theft gets translated into the language of vague professional dissatisfaction when you don't have the words for what actually happened to you, or when you can't prove it, or when you've been made to feel like the problem is yours. I asked if they'd be reaching out to her as part of the investigation. They said they would contact her directly. The formal investigation took 4 weeks. I was interviewed 2 additional times, each interview more specific and detailed than the last. I know at least 3 other people were also interviewed because one of them contacted me. It was Owen. He sent a text that said simply, "They called me in to talk about Britt." About the press release situation. I told them everything I remembered. I texted back, "Thank you." He responded with a thumbs up. A few seconds later, another message. I always thought something was off, but I never had the words for it. I read that twice. Then I put my phone down and looked at the wall for a moment. Britt was placed on administrative leave on a Thursday afternoon. I know because I was at my desk when it happened. Patrick walked to her corner desk and said something in a low voice. I wasn't close enough to hear the words. I watched Britt's face cycle through several expressions quickly. Confusion, calculation, a brief flash of something that might have been fear, then a careful neutral. She looked at her monitor. She looked at the door to the hallway. She looked back at Patrick. Then she picked up her purse, the leather tote with the custom monogram in a serif font, and she walked toward the elevator. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. On her way past the section of the floor where I sat, we made eye contact for approximately 3 seconds. I held it. I didn't change my expression. I didn't smile, and I didn't look away. I looked at her the way you look at someone when you know exactly what occurred and they understand that you know. Something shifted in her face. She kept walking. The elevator doors closed. Around me, 2 coworkers glanced up from their monitors, looked at each other briefly, and looked back down. The normal sounds of the office continued. No one said anything. I went back to my work. There was a mandatory team meeting the following Monday. Patrick ran it. He was careful and measured in a way I'd never seen from him, choosing words with unusual precision. He said there had been personnel changes, and that he wanted to take the opportunity to restructure some responsibilities. He mentioned my name 4 times in 15 minutes. Each mention was a credit or attribution, a campaign that had outperformed projections, a strategic pivot that a client had praised, a framework that was going to be adopted team-wide, things I had built, things that had been, until that morning, floating in the ambient attribution of a team that had stopped looking closely. Carla, the VP who had called Britt Sunshine in internal communications, was not at that meeting. I found out later that Carla was under a separate internal review for management failures, specifically for her role in the mishandling of the exit interview complaint that had been filed 8 months prior and never escalated to anyone with the authority to act on it. The official framing was procedural failure. The practical reality was was that someone had flagged a serious concern, and she had filed it in a folder that no one ever opened. She resigned 4 weeks after Britt's termination. What no one tells you about being right, comprehensively and documentably right, after a long period of being dismissed as fragile or paranoid or difficult, is how little it feels like you expected it to feel. I had spent 11 months building something meticulous and careful. I had done it without ever raising my voice, without making a single accusation I couldn't support with a timestamp, without once letting my face show what I knew. I had documented 22 incidents, assembled a 43-page revision history printout, obtained written confirmation from IT of unauthorized access, and watched a legal team conclude that what I had described was exactly what I said it was. I had been completely, verifiably correct. I sat at my desk the afternoon after the Monday meeting, in the quiet of a normal workday, and waited to feel something commensurate with the effort. Triumph, relief, the particular satisfaction of vindication. What I felt was tired, the specific tiredness of having carried something very heavy for a very long time, and then setting it down. Your arms ache in the exact shape of the thing you were holding, even after the weight is gone. The absence of the weight doesn't feel like freedom right away. It feels like absence. Derek took me to the Italian restaurant near our apartment on the Friday after Britt left, the one we'd gone to on our first date when we were 26 and we didn't know each other well enough yet to be nervous about it, which meant we were actually nervous about it in the way you can only be when you're 26 and you think this might be important. We ordered the same things we'd ordered that first night, the agnolotti and the wine that was not quite the right price for the occasion, but was exactly the right wine. He reached across the table and held my hand. Are you okay? I thought about it properly. I think I will be. Are you proud of yourself? I thought about the 11 months, the notebook pages with my handwriting in the margins, the way I'd learned to keep my face completely blank while sitting in meetings where Britt presented work I had originated, work I had stayed up until 11 p.m. on a Sunday building while Derek sent me heart emojis and fell asleep waiting for me, the calls with Margot, the 43 pages of revision history I'd printed out and carried in a 2-inch binder to a conference room in the legal wing and placed on a table in front of an attorney who'd looked at them for a long time before he said anything. Yes, I said. Actually, yes. He nodded. He already knew I'd get there. He'd been waiting for me to say it out loud. 3 things happened in the months after. The first, I was offered Britt's position, not as a lateral adjustment, as a formal promotion with a new title, Senior Director of Brand Strategy, and a salary increase of $22,000 annually. The offer came from Patrick in a meeting with HR present. He looked somewhat uncomfortable, which I attributed to the fact that he was probably also aware that his own oversight had allowed the situation to persist for as long as it had. I accepted the position without any particular drama. The second, Owen reached out in month 3 to ask whether there were openings on my team. I told him yes. I got him through the process in 2 weeks, and he started the following month. He's organized now in a way he wasn't before, which I think is a thing that can happen to you when you survive something that could have ended your career at 24, and he is brilliant in the same way he always was, just with more room to be it. He's the best person on my team, and I tell him that in his quarterly reviews, which I know matters to him because it mattered to me when no one was saying it about my work. The third thing happened at a Saturday farmer's market 4 months after Britt's termination. Derek and I were at the tomato stand, debating between 2 varieties, when I saw her on the other side of the market. She was with a friend, the 2 of them looking at something on the friend's phone, and she laughed at whatever it was, the same laugh I'd heard for 3 years, easy and quick and calibrated. She had the leather tote on her shoulder. Her hair was the same. She looked fine. She didn't see me. I stood there for a moment and looked at her, just a woman in a crowded Saturday market, and waited to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, pity, curiosity, the residue of any of it. There was nothing. Not numbness, not suppression, just ordinary, neutral absence, the same nothing you feel when you see the face of someone who was once relevant to your life and isn't anymore. She was information I had already processed and filed. Nothing new was coming from her direction. I turned back to the tomatoes. I bought the Sun Gold variety, $6.50, and the heirloom mix for $8, and Derek carried the bag home. I made pasta that night with the Sun Golds roasted down until they were practically jam, the way my mother used to do it. We ate at our kitchen table with the window open because it was finally warm enough. Derek asked if I wanted a second glass of wine. I said yes. It was a good evening. It was just an evening, which is what a good evening is.